You want to know what betrayal feels like? It doesn't come with dramatic music or slow motion tears. It comes in a whisper at a rehearsal dinner, delivered with a smile so perfect it could have been painted on. I was standing there, clutching a small gift I'd wrapped myself, a photo album filled with pictures of my son from birth to graduation, each one carefully chosen to show the woman he was marrying just how loved he was, how carefully he'd been raised. I thought she'd want to see the boy who became the man she claimed to love. How naive I was. The rehearsal was winding down, everyone laughing and toasting, and she approached me with that photographer's smile. You know the one, practiced and empty. She leaned in close, close enough that her breath tickled my ear, close enough that anyone watching would think she was sharing something sweet, maybe thanking me for raising such a wonderful son. Instead, she said 5 words that would change everything. Don't come tomorrow. You don't fit the picture I want. Don't come tomorrow. To my son's wedding. The wedding I had dreamed about since the day he was born. The wedding I had saved for, planned for, prayed for. The day I thought I would watch my boy become a husband. The day I thought I would gain not just a daughter-in-law, but a daughter. You don't fit the picture I want. I stood there, frozen, that little gift still in my hands, watching her float away to pose for another photo, her arm sliding around my son's waist like she owned him, like she owned his entire world, like I was just some extra who had wandered onto the wrong movie set. The worst part? Nobody else heard it. Nobody else saw the knife slide between my ribs with surgical precision. They just saw a bride talking to her future mother-in-law, probably sharing wedding day excitement. I didn't say a word. I didn't make a scene. I did what I always do. I absorbed the pain silently, carried it in my chest like a stone, and walked away. But as I left that rehearsal dinner, as I drove home through streets I'd traveled for 32 years, I made a decision. If she didn't want me there, then I wouldn't be there. But she had no idea what she just unleashed. Let me tell you about sacrifice. Let me tell you about what it means to raise a child alone, because clearly some people have forgotten. I was 19 when I got pregnant. 19 and stupid and in love with a boy who promised me the world and then vanished the moment responsibility came knocking. I could have taken the easy way out. God knows enough people suggested it. My own mother, bless her soul, sat me down and very gently explained how hard it would be, how much I'd be giving up. But I looked at that ultrasound picture, at that tiny blur that would become my son, and I knew I couldn't give up. I wouldn't give up. So I didn't. I worked 3 jobs while pregnant, 3 jobs while my belly grew and my feet swelled, and other girls my age were going to parties and dating and living the carefree life I'd never have. I cleaned offices at night, worked retail during the day, and babysat on weekends. Every dollar went into a jar marked baby. When he was born, my beautiful, perfect boy, I held him in that hospital room and made him a promise. I promised him he would never want for love, never doubt that he was wanted, never feel the abandonment that his father had shown us both. I kept that promise. I kept it through the sleepless nights when he had colic and I walked the floors of our tiny apartment, bouncing him and singing lullabies off-key because I was so tired I could barely stand. I kept it through the years of daycare drops and pickups, of choosing between groceries and new shoes for his growing feet, of staying up until midnight helping with homework after working 10-hour shifts. I kept it when he got sick, and I had to take unpaid days off, sitting beside his hospital bed and pretending I wasn't calculating how many bills would go unpaid that month. I kept it through Little League games where I was the only parent cheering from the bleachers, through school plays where other kids had both parents taking pictures while I tried to be everywhere at once. I kept it when he asked why he didn't have a dad like other kids, and I had to find words to explain abandonment to a 5-year-old without destroying his heart or his trust in love itself. Those weren't glamorous years. There were no Instagram posts about my journey, no supportive network of other single moms in my social circle. There was just me and him, figuring it out day by day, mistake by mistake, triumph by small triumph. I never remarried, not because I didn't want love, God, how I wanted it, but because every man I met seemed to see my son as baggage rather than blessing. They wanted the woman without the child, the wife without the history, the romance without the responsibility. So it was just us. And you know what? We were happy. We were a team. We had our traditions: Saturday morning pancakes shaped like his favorite cartoon characters, Sunday afternoon movies with homemade popcorn, bedtime stories where he was always the hero who saved the day. I watched him grow from a chubby-cheeked toddler into a lanky teenager, watched him navigate first heartbreaks and failed tests and friendship drama. I was there for all of it: the good report cards and the bad ones, the triumphant goals in soccer and the devastating losses, the first day of high school and the last day of graduation. I was there when he left for college, helping him pack his dorm room, and then crying in the car for 2 hours because the apartment felt so empty without his laughter filling it. I was there when he graduated, cheering louder than any parent in that auditorium because I knew exactly what it had cost, both of us, to get to that moment. And I was there when he met her. I'll never forget the day he brought her home. He was so excited, so nervous, babbling about this amazing woman he'd met at work. "You're going to love her, Mom," he said. "She's smart and funny and kind. You two are going to be best friends." I wanted that so badly. I wanted to love the woman who loved my son. I wanted to welcome her into our little family, to share the stories and the traditions, to watch her fall in love, not just with him, but with the life we'd built together. But from the moment she walked through my door, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't anything dramatic. She was polite enough, smiled at the right moments, complimented my cooking. But there was something cold underneath, something calculating in the way she looked around our modest home, in the way she assessed everything from the furniture to the family photos to me. She asked questions that felt more like an interview than conversation. How long had I lived in this neighborhood? What kind of work did I do? Did I have any family nearby? Did I date? It felt invasive, but my son was so happy, so eager for us to connect, that I answered everything with a smile. As the months went on, I started noticing changes. My son called less frequently. Our traditional Sunday dinners became maybe next week, and then stopped altogether. When I did see him, he seemed different, more distant, more formal, like he was editing himself. She had opinions about everything. The way I decorated for holidays was too much. The gifts I gave were unnecessary. The stories I told about his childhood were embarrassing. Slowly, methodically, she began erasing me from his life, one memory at a time. But I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself she was just nervous about fitting in, about finding her place. I told myself that all relationships required adjustment, that I needed to step back and let them build their own life. I was so desperate to believe in their love that I ignored every red flag waving right in front of my face. The morning of the wedding, I woke up at 5 a.m., just like I always did. Habit, I guess. 30-plus years of early shifts and child-rearing schedules had trained my body to rise with the dawn, whether I needed to or not. But this morning was different. This morning, my wedding dress, a pale blue dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, the first formal dress I'd purchased in years, hung untouched on the back of my bedroom door. This morning, the small gift bag with the pearl earrings I'd planned to give her, my grandmother's earrings that were supposed to represent the something old tradition, sat unopened on my kitchen table. This morning, I wasn't going anywhere. The phone started ringing at 8. My sister first, wondering where I was, if I needed a ride to the church. Then my neighbor, asking if I wanted to share a taxi. Then friends from work, from church, from the grocery store where I'd been shopping for 20 years, all of them excited to celebrate with me, all of them expecting to see me beaming in the front row as my son got married. Each conversation was harder than the last. Where are you? The ceremony starts in 3 hours. I won't be attending, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. What? Why? Are you sick? No, I'm not sick. Then what's wrong? Did something happen? And here's where it gets interesting. Here's where I had to decide who I was going to be in this story. Was I going to be the bitter mother-in-law who couldn't let go? Was I going to be the troublemaker who caused drama on her son's wedding day? Was I going to be the villain in their love story? Or was I going to tell the truth? She asked me not to come. I said simply, I'm honoring her request. Silence. Every single time, the silence stretched long enough for me to hear their shock, their confusion, their disbelief. That can't be right, my sister finally said. You must have misunderstood. But I hadn't misunderstood. Those 5 words were burned into my memory like a brand. Don't come tomorrow. You don't fit the picture I want. Clear as crystal, sharp as a blade. I didn't misunderstand, I told my sister. She was very clear about what she wanted. More silence, then quietly, what are you going to do? I'm going to respect her wishes, I said, and I'm going to see what kind of man I raised. Because here's the thing nobody seemed to understand. This wasn't just about me being excluded from a wedding. This was about my son allowing it to happen. This was about whether 32 years of love and sacrifice had raised a man who would stand up for his mother, or a man who would let her be erased from the most important day of his life. This was a test I never wanted to give, but one that needed to be taken. So I sat in my kitchen, still in my pajamas, drinking coffee from the mug he'd made me in 3rd-grade art class, lopsided and painted bright yellow with "World's Best Mom" in his shaky handwriting. I sat there and waited for my phone to ring again. It did, over and over. Friends, relatives, neighbors, co-workers. The story spread through our small community like wildfire. Nobody could believe it. Nobody could understand how a bride could exclude her groom's mother from their wedding. But what hurt most were the calls I didn't get. Radio silence from my son. No frantic text asking where I was. No panicked voicemail wondering if I was okay. Nothing. Either he didn't know I was missing, which meant she hadn't told him about our conversation, or he did know and had chosen to do nothing about it. I wasn't sure which possibility hurt more. Around noon, I made myself a sandwich and ate it standing at my kitchen window, looking out at the garden where my son and I used to plant tomatoes together every spring. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was supposed to be the day I gained a daughter. But instead, it felt like the day I lost my son. But I wasn't going to cry. Not yet. Because this story wasn't over. This was just the beginning of the truth coming to light. And sometimes, the truth burns everything down before it builds something better. I found out what happened at the church through a chain of phone calls that started around 4 in the afternoon and continued well into the evening. Piece by piece, the story came together like a puzzle made of broken glass. My son had been pacing in the groom's room, checking his watch, asking everyone who walked by if they'd seen his mother. The wedding was supposed to start at 2 p.m., and by 1:30, his best man had finally worked up the courage to tell him I wasn't there. "What do you mean she's not here?" my son had asked. "I mean she's not here," his best man replied. "Nobody's seen her. Her seat is empty." My son, according to multiple witnesses, went pale. He sent his best man to check the parking lot, sent his cousins to call my house, sent his uncle to drive by and see if my car was in the driveway. When they confirmed I was at home but not coming, he apparently stood there in his tuxedo, completely bewildered. "There has to be a mistake," he kept saying. "She wouldn't miss this. Something must be wrong." Meanwhile, in the bridal suite, his bride was having her own crisis, not because she was worried about me, oh no, but because my absence was raising questions she didn't want to answer. Her maid of honor, apparently a woman with more spine than I'd given her credit for, had asked point blank, "Where's his mom? Did something happen between you two?" According to the bridesmaid, who later called my neighbor, who then called me, the bride had laughed it off. "Oh, you know how mothers can be about their sons getting married. She's probably just being dramatic." But the maid of honor pressed. "Dramatic about what? What did you say to her?" And that's when the bride made her first mistake. Instead of continuing to play innocent, she got defensive. "I didn't say anything wrong. I just made it clear what I expected for my wedding day." Her bridesmaids exchanged glances. They knew her well enough to read between those lines. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Here's where divine justice or cosmic karma or just plain old-fashioned truth decided to make an appearance. The best man, my son's college roommate and closest friend, had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the whole situation. He'd always liked me, had spent countless weekends at our house during college, had been treated like a second son for 4 years. He couldn't understand why I would just not show up without explanation. So he did what any good friend would do. He started digging. He called me directly around 3 p.m., just as the wedding should have been starting. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, and I could hear the concern in his voice. "Are you okay? Everyone's worried about you." "I'm fine, sweetie," I told him. I'd known this boy since he was 18 years old. I'd fed him dinner at least once a week for 4 years. I'd listened to him worry about exams and girls and his future. He deserved the truth, not some polite lie. "But why aren't you here?" he asked. "This doesn't make sense. You wouldn't miss this." So I told him, word for word, exactly what she'd said to me at the rehearsal dinner. I told him about the gift I'd been holding, about the smile on her face, about the way she delivered that poisonous message like it was a casual comment about the weather. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. "She said that?" he finally whispered. "She said that." Another pause. Then, "Jesus Christ, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she was. I never thought she would." "It's not your fault, honey," I told him. "But I need you to understand something. I'm not staying away to hurt my son or to ruin his wedding. I'm staying away because she asked me to, and I'm respecting her wishes. What happens next is up to him." What happened next changed everything, because this young man, this boy I'd helped raise, this kid who still called me when he needed advice, hung up the phone and marched straight to my son. "We need to talk," he said. "Right now." They went outside, behind the church, where the best man repeated every word of our conversation. My son listened in stunned silence, his face growing darker with each detail. "She said what?" he finally exploded. Those exact words. Don't come tomorrow. You don't fit the picture I want. My son stood there in his expensive tuxedo, looking at the church where his bride was waiting, where guests were growing restless, where the photographer was probably wondering where the groom had disappeared to. And for the first time in months, he saw clearly. He saw how his calls to me had become less frequent. He saw how our Sunday dinners had stopped. He saw how my gifts had been criticized, my stories dismissed, my presence gradually erased from his life. He saw what I had been too polite to point out, what I had hoped he would notice on his own. His bride didn't want a mother-in-law. She wanted ownership, complete total ownership of him and his life and his future, with no inconvenient reminders of the woman who had raised him. But here's where the story takes another turn, because while my son was having his revelation in the church parking lot, inside the building, more truth was coming to light. The maid of honor, still bothered by the bride's dismissive attitude about my absence, had started asking more pointed questions, and under pressure, the bride had started giving more revealing answers. Maybe it's better this way, she'd said, touching up her lipstick. She was always too involved anyway, too clingy, too much, too much. The woman who had raised the man she claimed to love was too much. The maid of honor, bless her, had apparently stared at the bride in the mirror and asked the question that needed to be asked. Do you even like him? What kind of question is that? The bride had snapped. The kind of question someone asks when they watch their friends spend more time planning a wedding than building a marriage. And that's when everything started unraveling. Because this maid of honor, it turned out, had been harboring some serious doubts about this relationship for months. She'd watched the bride flirt with other men at the bachelor party. She'd overheard phone calls that didn't sound like conversations between faithful partners. She'd seen credit card statements and bank records that didn't add up. Most importantly, she discovered something the night before the wedding that she hadn't known how to handle. Something that, combined with the bride's casual cruelty toward me, finally pushed her to speak up. You need to call off this wedding, she told the bride. Are you insane? Do you know how much this cost? How many people are here? Do you know that he loves you? Do you know that his mother spent 32 years sacrificing for him so he could be the man you're about to marry? Do you know that you're about to destroy the most important relationship in his life for your own selfish reasons? The bride laughed, actually laughed. You're being ridiculous. She's just his mother. I'm going to be his wife. And what about Marcus? The maid of honor asked quietly. The bride froze. What about who? Marcus, from last weekend, when you told everyone you were at a spa. The room went silent. The other bridesmaids, who had been pretending not to listen, suddenly couldn't pretend anymore. I don't know what you're talking about, the bride said, but her voice had lost its confidence. I have photos, the maid of honor said simply, on my phone, from when I drove by the hotel because I was worried about you. Photos of the bride with another man, 3 days before her wedding to my son. The pieces were all falling into place now. The urgency to get married, the secrecy about finances, the need to control every aspect of my son's life, including removing his mother from the picture, the callousness toward anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions. This wasn't a love story. This was a con game. And I, the inconvenient mother who knew my son too well, who might ask the wrong questions or notice the wrong things, I was just an obstacle to be removed. While this revelation was happening in the bridal suite, my son was making his way back into the church. He'd made his decision. He was going to postpone the wedding until he could sort this out, until he could understand what had happened between his bride and his mother. But he never got the chance because the maid of honor had made her decision too. She walked out of the bridal suite, found my son in the hallway, and handed him her phone. "You need to see this," she said. The photo was clear enough. His bride, unmistakably, in the arms of another man, kissing him like her life depended on it. The timestamp showed it was taken last weekend, while my son had been at his bachelor party, trusting and faithful and planning their future together. My son stared at that phone for a long moment. Then he looked up at the maid of honor and asked very quietly, "How long has this been going on?" "I don't know," she said, "but I know it wasn't the first time." And that's when my son did something that made me proud, even though I wouldn't find out about it until hours later. He walked into that church, past all the guests in their fancy clothes, past all the flowers and decorations and expensive preparations. He walked up to the altar where the minister was waiting, where his groomsmen were lined up in their matching tuxedos. He took the microphone, and he told the truth. "There will be no wedding today," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary. "I apologize to everyone who came to celebrate with us, but I've just learned some things that make it impossible for this marriage to take place." The church erupted. Gasps, murmurs, people standing up to get a better view of the drama unfolding at the altar. The bride, who had finally emerged from the bridal suite, stood at the back of the church in her white dress, her face red with fury and humiliation. "You can't do this," she screamed. "You can't humiliate me like this." My son looked at her across the length of that church, past all the guests and flowers and broken dreams, and said the words I wish I could have been there to hear. "You humiliated my mother yesterday. Today, you humiliated yourself." Then he walked out, just walked right out of that church, out of that life, out of that lie that had been masquerading as love. The bride collapsed, literally collapsed right there in the aisle, sobbing and screaming about money and plans and how this would ruin everything. And you know what the most telling part was? She never once said she loved him, never once begged him to reconsider because she couldn't live without him, never once mentioned their relationship or their future or their feelings for each other. She talked about money, about embarrassment, about ruined plans, because that's all it had ever been to her, a plan, a business transaction, a way to secure her future at the expense of his. And I, the mother who supposedly didn't fit her picture, I was the only obstacle to her perfect con. You would think the story ends there, with justice served and truth revealed. You would think that my son walking out of that wedding would be the end of the betrayal, the final chapter in this painful saga. You would be wrong, because wounded narcissists don't just accept defeat. They rewrite history. They control the narrative. They make sure that everyone knows their version of events, and their version makes them the victim and everyone else the villain. Within hours of the church disaster, the story was already changing. Social media posts started appearing, carefully crafted to paint a very different picture of what had happened. The bride's friends shared posts about a cruel family who had sabotaged true love. They talked about a manipulative mother who couldn't let her son grow up. They posted about lies and interference that had destroyed an innocent woman's happiness. My name wasn't mentioned directly, but in our small town, everyone knew who they were talking about. The woman who hadn't shown up to her son's wedding. The bitter mother who had somehow orchestrated this disaster from her kitchen table. The posts were shared and shared again and commented on with increasingly creative theories about what I had done to ruin this poor girl's special day. I found out about it when my neighbor called me at 9 p.m. her voice tight with anger. "Have you seen what they're saying about you online?" she asked. I hadn't. I don't spend much time on social media. I'm too busy living my actual life to worry about my digital one. But she read me some of the posts, and with each one, I felt my chest tighten with a familiar rage. They were lies, all of it. Carefully constructed lies designed to make me the villain in a story where I had been nothing but the victim. According to their version, I had been against the relationship from the beginning. I had filled my son's head with doubts. I had manipulated the situation to cause maximum damage on their wedding day. None of it was true. But truth has never been a requirement for a good smear campaign. The worst part was reading the comments from people who didn't even know me. People from other towns and states who had seen the posts shared by friends of friends of friends. They called me names I won't repeat. They made assumptions about my character, my parenting, my life that were so far from reality, they would have been funny if they weren't so vicious. "Some mothers just can't let go," one comment read. "She probably waited her whole life for this chance to ruin his happiness." Another, "I bet she's been poisoning him against his girlfriend for years." Typical controlling mother behavior. And my personal favorite, "She should be ashamed of herself. That poor bride must be devastated." Poor bride. The woman who had cheated on my son days before their wedding. The woman who had told me not to come to the ceremony because I didn't fit her picture. The woman who had spent months systematically erasing me from my son's life. She was the victim in their story. I was the monster. But here's what really got to me, what really made my blood boil as I sat there listening to my neighbor read these posts. My son was staying silent. He wasn't defending me. He wasn't correcting the lies. He wasn't setting the record straight about what had really happened. He was letting them destroy my reputation while he presumably dealt with his own heartbreak in private. And that hurt more than anything the bride had done to me, because I expected better from her. She had shown me exactly who she was from the beginning. But from my son, the boy I had raised to stand up for what was right, the man I had taught to protect the people he loved, his silence felt like abandonment all over again. 3 days after the wedding that never happened, I got a letter in my mailbox. Hand-delivered, not mailed. Typed on expensive stationery. Signed by a lawyer whose name I didn't recognize. The letter accused me of intentional interference with contractual relations. It claimed that I had maliciously sabotaged the wedding through manipulation and deceit. It demanded that I cease and desist from any further harassment of the bride and her family. It threatened legal action if I continued to spread falsehoods about their family. Let me be clear about something. I hadn't spread anything. I hadn't made any public statements about what happened. I hadn't posted on social media, hadn't given interviews, hadn't even corrected the lies being told about me. I had stayed silent, just like I always did, absorbing the pain and letting other people control the narrative. But this letter, this legal threat based on their lies, this was too much. Because they weren't just trying to erase me from my son's life anymore. They weren't just trying to control the story. They were trying to intimidate me into permanent silence, to make sure I would never tell my side of what happened. They wanted to make sure that their version, where I was the villain and they were the victims, became the official truth. They had pushed the wrong woman too far. I called my friend Margaret, a woman I'd known since high school who had become a paralegal after raising her own children. Margaret had always been the smartest person in any room, the one who could see through lies and spot manipulation from a mile away. "Read me that letter again," she said after I'd explained what happened. I read it to her word by word, my voice shaking with anger. "Mm-hmm," she said when I finished. "And you haven't posted anything online? Haven't talked to reporters? Haven't done anything they're accusing you of?" "Nothing. I haven't said a word publicly about any of this." "Then this letter is what we call phishing," Margaret said. "They're trying to scare you into staying quiet about something they're worried you might reveal. The question is, what are they so afraid you know?" That's when it hit me. They weren't just trying to control the narrative about the wedding. They were trying to control the narrative about everything, about their relationship, about their financial situation, about whatever had really been going on behind the scenes. Margaret agreed to do some digging. She had connections in the legal community, friends in banking, a network of people who could quietly ask questions without raising red flags. What she found out over the next week made the cheating scandal look like a minor indiscretion. The bride's family was in serious financial trouble. Her father's business was failing, drowning in debt that he'd been hiding from his creditors. Her mother had been running up credit cards for years, trying to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford. The wedding itself had been paid for with borrowed money, loans taken out against the assumption that my son would soon be contributing his salary to their household expenses. But it went deeper than that. Margaret found records of conversations between the bride and a financial planner, discussions about life insurance policies and asset transfers that would take effect after the marriage. They weren't just planning a wedding, they were planning a financial rescue operation, with my son as the unwitting donor. And I, with my questions about their rush to marry, my observations about their spending habits, my tendency to notice when things didn't add up, I was the biggest threat to their plan. That's why I had to be removed from the picture. Not because I didn't fit their aesthetic vision for the wedding photos, because I didn't fit their financial vision for the future. They needed my son isolated, dependent, and unaware. They needed him to have no one to turn to for advice or support, no one who might ask uncomfortable questions about where his money was going. They needed me gone, but they had miscalculated badly, because in trying to remove me, they had revealed themselves. In pushing too hard, they had exposed their true motives. And in threatening me legally, they had given me a reason to fight back. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was defending my son, even if he didn't know he needed defending, even if he wouldn't thank me for it. The hardest part about fighting for someone you love is when they don't want you to fight for them, when they'd rather you stayed quiet, stayed invisible, stayed out of the way of their mistakes. My son finally called me a week after the wedding disaster. 1 week of silence while his ex-fiancée and her family were spreading lies about me online, while their lawyer was threatening me with legal action, while I was uncovering the truth about their financial schemes. 1 week before he bothered to check on the mother who had raised him. "Mom?" he said when I answered the phone, and his voice sounded tired, defeated. "Can we talk?" "Of course, sweetheart," I said, because despite everything, despite the hurt and anger and disappointment, he was still my son. He was still the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, still the teenager who called me from college when he was homesick, still the man whose happiness mattered more to me than my own. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry about what she said to you at the rehearsal dinner. I'm sorry you missed the wedding. I'm sorry about all of this." He sounded genuine. He sounded broken. And part of me, the mother part that just wanted to comfort him and make everything better, wanted to tell him it was okay, that we could move past this, that all that mattered was that he was okay. But another part of me, the woman part that had been wounded and threatened and lied about, wasn't ready to forgive quite so easily. Are you sorry it happened? Or are you sorry you found out about it? I asked. Silence. Long, uncomfortable silence. That's not fair, he finally said. Isn't it? Because from where I sit, you let her cut me out of your life for months before that wedding. You let her make decisions about our relationship without ever talking to me about it. You let her treat me like I was some inconvenience to be managed rather than the woman who loved you first and longest. I didn't know what she was doing, he said. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. More silence, then quietly. You're right. I chose her over you, and I'm sorry. It was the first time he'd admitted it. The first time he'd acknowledged that this hadn't been some misunderstanding or communication failure. He had made a choice to prioritize his relationship with her over his relationship with me, and that choice had consequences. What happens now? I asked. I don't know, he said. I'm staying with Jake for a while, trying to figure things out. The lease on our apartment was in both our names, and she's making things difficult. Of course she was. Because narcissists don't just disappear quietly when their plans fall apart. They burn everything down on their way out. There's something else, he said. She's been posting things online about you, about what happened. I know. You've seen them? I've heard about them. They're not true, he said. The things she's saying about you, about how this all happened, I want you to know that I know they're not true. Do you? I asked. Because you haven't said anything publicly to correct them. Another pause. I didn't think, I mean, I figured it would blow over. I didn't want to make things worse. Worse for who? For her? For you? Because they can't get much worse for me. That's when I told him about the lawyer's letter, about the threats and accusations and demands for my silence. I watched him get angrier with each detail, listened to him curse and apologize, and promise to make it stop. She can't do this to you, he said. This is insane. You didn't do anything wrong. No, I didn't. But that doesn't seem to matter to her or her family. I'll talk to her. I'll make her stop. Will you? Because you've had a week to set the record straight, and instead you've stayed silent while they trashed my reputation. I was dealing with my own stuff, Mom. Finding out about the cheating, about the lies, about all of it. I needed time to process. And what about my stuff? What about what I was dealing with? Did you think this was easy for me? I wasn't trying to be cruel, but I was tired of being the understanding one, the patient one, the one who absorbed everyone else's pain while ignoring her own. You're right, he said again. I should have defended you from the beginning. I should have called you sooner. I should have been a better son. The fight went out of me then, because he was my son, my boy, and he was hurting too. He had been betrayed and humiliated and used, and while that didn't excuse his failures, it explained them. You're a good son, I told him. You just made some bad choices. What can I do to fix this? He asked. I don't know if you can, I said honestly, but we can start by telling the truth. All of it. That's when I told him what Margaret had discovered about the debts and the financial planning and the insurance policies, about the scheme to use him as a financial lifeline for her failing family, about the real reason I had been pushed out of his life. The silence that followed was different from the earlier pauses. This was the silence of someone whose entire world was being rewritten, whose understanding of reality was crumbling in real time. Jesus, he finally whispered. I was that blind? You weren't blind, I said. You were in love, or you thought you were. She's very good at what she does. What she does? Manipulation, control, making people see what she wants them to see while hiding what she doesn't want them to know. He was quiet for a long time. Then, What do we do now? We. Not I. We. Now we fight back, I said. Fighting back turned out to be more complicated than either of us had anticipated, because when you're dealing with people who have no conscience, no limits, no boundaries they won't cross to get what they want, the usual rules don't apply. 2 days after my conversation with my son, the harassment escalated. I started getting phone calls at all hours, numbers I didn't recognize, voices I couldn't identify, all of them angry about what I had done to that poor innocent bride. The calls ranged from merely unpleasant to genuinely threatening. People who had read the social media posts, who had believed the lies, who had decided I deserved punishment for my cruelty. You should be ashamed of yourself, one woman hissed into my voicemail at 2 in the morning. Destroying that girl's happiness because you can't let your son grow up. Another caller was more direct. We know where you live, lady. Maybe it's time someone taught you a lesson about minding your own business. I started screening my calls, then stopped answering the phone altogether. But they found other ways to reach me. Someone threw eggs at my house. Someone left a bag of garbage on my front porch with a note that said, "Here's where you belong." Someone keyed my car in the grocery store parking lot. The worst part was going to work, where my coworkers had seen the social media posts and heard the gossip. Most of them knew me well enough to question the stories, but a few had clearly decided I was guilty as charged. I could feel their eyes on me, hear their whispered conversations that stopped when I walked by. The woman who had sabotaged her son's wedding, the bitter mother who couldn't let go. I wanted to defend myself, to tell them what had really happened, to set the record straight. But every time I opened my mouth to try, I remembered that lawyer's letter, the threats of legal action if I spread falsehoods about their family. So I stayed silent, just like they wanted, just like they had planned. Meanwhile, Margaret was building our case. She had connections in the banking industry who confirmed the bride's family's financial problems. She had friends in law enforcement who verified that the lawyer's letter was essentially meaningless, a scare tactic with no legal foundation. Most importantly, she had found the smoking gun. "You're not going to believe this," she told me over coffee at her kitchen table, spreading documents across the surface like evidence at a crime scene. But I found the insurance policies. The bride had taken out a life insurance policy on my son 6 months before their planned wedding, a large policy that would pay out to her as the beneficiary in case of his death. She had also researched the process for becoming the executor of his estate, should anything happen to him after their marriage, and she had made inquiries about power of attorney documents that would give her control over his finances if he became incapacitated. She wasn't just planning to marry him, Margaret said, her voice tight with anger. She was planning to own him completely. The documentation was all there, in black and white, email exchanges with insurance agents, online searches about legal procedures, questions about what would happen to debts and assets in various scenarios. It painted a picture of someone who saw marriage not as a partnership, but as a takeover. Someone who had been planning for every contingency except the one that actually happened, getting caught. "This is why you had to be removed from his life," Margaret continued. "You would have noticed these things. You would have asked questions. You would have protected him." I stared at the papers, feeling sick. This woman hadn't just broken my son's heart. She had been planning to destroy his entire life, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but her control and his money. "What do we do with this?" I asked. "We expose her," Margaret said. "All of her. We tell the truth about what she was really after. And we make sure everyone knows exactly who was trying to manipulate whom." But when I called my son to tell him what we'd found, his reaction wasn't what I expected. "Mom, please," he said, and he sounded exhausted. "Can't we just let this go? I just want it to be over." Let it go? She was planning to systematically take control of your entire life. She was researching how to inherit your money if you died. And you want to let it go? She didn't succeed, did she? I found out the truth. The wedding's off. I'm done with her. Isn't that enough? What about me? What about my reputation? What about the lies she's telling about our family? "I'll talk to her about stopping the social media stuff," he said, "but I can't do a public battle with her, Mom. I can't handle any more drama right now." Drama. He called it drama. The systematic destruction of his mother's reputation was drama to him. The threats and harassment I was facing were drama. The financial schemes and insurance policies and plans to control his life were drama. "This isn't drama," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "This is your life. This is our lives. And she's not going to stop just because you ask her nicely." "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Declare war on her? Make this even more public than it already is?" "I want you to stand up for yourself and for me. I want you to stop being afraid of what people might think and start caring about what's right." I am standing up for myself. I called off the wedding. I ended the relationship. I'm starting over. "No, you're hiding. There's a difference." The conversation ended badly, with both of us frustrated and hurt. He thought I was being vindictive, seeking revenge instead of healing. I thought he was being cowardly, choosing his comfort over justice. But I knew something he didn't. I knew that bullies don't stop when you ignore them. They escalate. They find new ways to hurt you, new pressure points to exploit. And I was right. 3 days later, she filed a restraining order against me. The restraining order was a masterpiece of manipulation, a legal document that painted me as a dangerous stalker who had been harassing her poor, innocent family. According to her sworn statement, I had been obsessively monitoring her social media accounts. I had been driving by her family's house. I had been making threatening phone calls and spreading malicious lies about her character. None of it was true, but truth isn't required for a temporary restraining order. You just need to convince a judge that you're afraid, that you need protection, that the other person is dangerous. And she was very convincing. I found out about it when a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door at 7 in the morning, serving me with papers that ordered me to stay at least 500 feet away from her, her family, her home, her workplace, and anywhere else she might reasonably be expected to appear. The deputy was professional, but clearly uncomfortable. He'd known me for years. Our kids had gone to school together, and this didn't make sense to him. "Mrs. Johnson," he said quietly after he'd served the papers, "is there something going on here I should know about?" I wanted to tell him everything. About the wedding that never happened, about the lies being spread online, about the financial schemes Margaret had uncovered. I wanted to explain that I was the victim here, not the aggressor. But I remembered that lawyer's letter, the threats of legal action if I spread falsehoods about their family. "I haven't done anything wrong, Deputy Miller," I said instead. "I haven't contacted her or her family. I haven't been anywhere near her house. I haven't made any threats." He nodded. "I figured as much. But you still need to abide by the order while it's in effect. There'll be a hearing in 2 weeks where you can respond." A hearing where I would have to stand in front of a judge and defend myself against accusations that everyone in town would hear about, where I would be forced to explain my side of the story or risk having a permanent restraining order placed against me, which of course was exactly what she wanted. Because here's the genius of her plan. By filing the restraining order, she forced me to either stay silent and let the lies stand, or speak publicly and risk being accused of violating the order by harassing her. If I stayed quiet, everyone would assume the restraining order was justified, that I really was the stalker ex-mother-in-law who couldn't accept her son's marriage. If I fought back, she could claim I was violating the order and have me arrested. It was a perfect legal trap, designed by someone who understood exactly how the system could be manipulated. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated Margaret. Margaret took one look at the restraining order application and started laughing. Not happy laughter, the kind of laughter that comes when someone hands you exactly what you need to destroy them. "She's opened the door," Margaret said, spreading the documents on her kitchen table again. "By filing this order, she's made this a legal matter, which means we get to respond with legal evidence." "What kind of evidence?" "All of it. The insurance policies, the financial planning documents, the proof that she was the one doing the stalking and planning and scheming. We get to tell the judge exactly what kind of person is claiming to need protection from you." Margaret had been busy while I was dealing with harassment and threats. She had contacted a lawyer friend who specialized in family law, a woman who had seen cases like this before. "This is what we call DARVO," the lawyer explained when we met with her. Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. The actual perpetrator claims to be the victim and portrays the real victim as the aggressor. She had seen it dozens of times. Abusers who filed restraining orders against their victims when the victims tried to leave. Manipulators who used the legal system to continue their harassment when other methods failed. "The good news," she continued, "is that judges are getting better at recognizing these tactics. The bad news is that we have to prove our case clearly and completely, because the burden is on us to show that her claims are false. So we built our case. Margaret's financial evidence, documentation of the bride's social media campaigns against me, screenshots of the threatening messages I'd been receiving from her supporters, phone records showing I hadn't been calling or contacting her. Most importantly, we had the timeline. We could show that all of her alleged harassment had supposedly occurred after I had already been publicly branded as the villain in her story. We could demonstrate that I had no motive to stalk or threaten someone who had already gotten what she wanted: my removal from my son's life. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late October. By then, the story had spread throughout our small town and beyond. The restraining order had become public record, which meant the local newspaper had picked it up, which meant it had been shared on social media, which meant everyone had an opinion about the bitter mother who was stalking her son's ex-fiancée. I didn't sleep the night before the hearing. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how my life had been turned upside down by one whispered sentence at a rehearsal dinner. "Don't come tomorrow. You don't fit the picture I want." 5 words that had led to all of this. 5 words that had exposed the truth about who she really was and what she really wanted. 5 words that had saved my son from a lifetime of manipulation and control, even if he didn't see it that way yet. 5 words that might cost me my reputation, my peace of mind, and my relationship with my son. But as I lay there in the dark, I realized something important. I wasn't sorry it had happened. Not really. Because the alternative, watching her marry my son and slowly destroy his life while I stayed silent and compliant, that would have been worse. Much worse. If fighting back meant being labeled a bitter ex-mother-in-law, so be it. If standing up for myself meant being dragged through the legal system, I could handle it. If protecting my son meant sacrificing my own comfort and reputation, it was worth it. She had pushed the wrong woman, and tomorrow she was going to find out exactly what that meant. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, less dramatic than the legal dramas on television make them seem. Just a judge's bench, a few rows of seats, and two tables where the opposing sides could present their cases. She was there when I arrived with Margaret and the lawyer, sitting at the plaintiff's table with her own attorney and her parents. She looked perfect, of course. Carefully styled hair, expensive clothes, just the right amount of makeup to suggest vulnerability without overdoing it. She was playing the role of the frightened victim, and she was very good at it. When the hearing began, her lawyer painted a picture of a woman terrorized by her ex-fiancé's unstable mother. He described the alleged phone calls, the supposed surveillance, the campaign of intimidation that had forced his client to seek legal protection. The bride testified in a soft, shaky voice about how afraid she was, how the stress had affected her health, how she just wanted to move on with her life without fear. She was convincing. If I hadn't known the truth, if I hadn't lived through what really happened, I might have believed her myself. Then it was our turn. Our lawyer started with the timeline, showing that the alleged harassment had supposedly begun after the bride had already succeeded in excluding me from the wedding, after her social media campaign against me was already in full swing. Your Honor, she said, why would Mrs. Johnson begin stalking and harassing someone who had already gotten what she wanted? What possible motive would she have for these alleged behaviors? Then came the financial evidence, the insurance policies, the estate planning inquiries, the documentation showing a pattern of manipulation and control that went far beyond normal wedding planning. The judge's expression grew more serious with each piece of evidence. But the real turning point came when our lawyer introduced the social media evidence, screenshots of the posts calling me a bitter, manipulative mother, along with documentation showing they had originated from accounts connected to the bride and her family. Your Honor, the respondent in this case has been the victim of a calculated smear campaign designed to destroy her reputation and isolate her from her son. The petitioner has used social media to portray Mrs. Johnson as exactly the kind of person who might engage in stalking behavior, thereby providing apparent justification for this restraining order request. The judge asked to see the social media evidence. He spent several minutes scrolling through the screenshots, his frown deepening with each post. Then he asked the bride a question that changed everything. Ms. Patterson, did you or anyone acting on your behalf create or share any of these social media posts about the respondent? She hesitated, just for a moment, but long enough for everyone in the courtroom to notice. I I may have shared some posts that were already circulating. She said carefully, I was upset about what happened at my wedding. What exactly happened at your wedding, Ms. Patterson? Another hesitation. Longer this time. Her lawyer tried to object, claiming the question was irrelevant to the restraining order petition, but the judge overruled him. The petitioner has alleged that she needs protection from harassment by the respondent, the judge said. I think the context of their relationship is very relevant to determining whether that protection is necessary. So the bride had to tell her version of what happened at the wedding, how the groom's mother had failed to appear, how this had caused disruption and emotional distress, how the entire event had been ruined by my absence. She was careful not to mention the cheating, of course, or the financial planning, or the conversation at the rehearsal dinner, but our lawyer was ready for this too. Your Honor, I'd like to present testimony from someone who was present at the rehearsal dinner and witnessed the interaction between the petitioner and the respondent. The best man had come to testify. My son's college friend, the young man who had called me on the day of the wedding, who had uncovered the truth and helped my son see clearly. He testified about the conversation at the rehearsal dinner, about the bride's exact words to me. "Don't come tomorrow. You don't fit the picture I want." He testified about my phone call on the wedding day, about how calm and dignified I had been despite being excluded from my son's wedding. He testified about the evidence he had discovered regarding the bride's infidelity and about how the wedding had been called off not because of anything I had done, but because of what she had done. The courtroom was completely silent during his testimony. Even the bride's parents seemed stunned by some of the details. When he finished, the judge looked directly at the bride. "Ms. Patterson, is it true that you told the respondent not to attend your wedding?" I, the wedding planning was very stressful, Your Honor. I may have said things that were taken the wrong way. Did you or did you not tell Mrs. Johnson not to come to your wedding because she didn't fit the picture you wanted? The bride's lawyer started to object again, but she cut him off. "Yes," she said quietly. "I said that." "And do you believe that asking someone not to attend their son's wedding might cause them emotional distress?" "I was just trying to. It was my wedding day, Your Honor. I wanted everything to be perfect." "Perfect enough to exclude the groom's mother?" Silence. The judge had heard enough. He denied the restraining order petition, finding that there was no credible evidence of harassment or stalking. More importantly, he noted in his ruling that the evidence suggested the petitioner had been the one engaging in harassment through social media campaigns and false accusations. But he didn't stop there. "Ms. Patterson," he said before dismissing us, "filing false accusations in this court is a serious matter. I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for review of potential perjury charges." The bride went pale. Her lawyer started to speak, but the judge held up his hand. "I've seen enough cases like this to recognize the pattern," he continued. "Using the legal system to continue harassment when other methods fail is an abuse of the court's resources and a disservice to genuine victims who need protection." As we left the courtroom, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: vindication. The truth was finally out. On the record, in a legal proceeding that would become public knowledge. But the bride wasn't finished yet, because narcissists don't accept defeat gracefully. They don't admit fault or learn from their mistakes. They escalate. The escalation came in the form of a lawsuit filed 3 weeks after the restraining order hearing, delivered to my door by certified mail on a gray November morning. The bride was suing me for intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation of character, and interference with business relations. According to the lawsuit, my malicious actions had caused her to suffer severe emotional trauma that required ongoing therapy. My false accusations had damaged her reputation in the community, affecting her ability to find employment. My interference with her wedding had caused her family to lose money on non-refundable deposits and expenses. She was seeking $250,000 in damages, $250,000, from a woman who worked 2 part-time jobs and lived in a modest house with a mortgage she'd been paying for 15 years. The lawsuit was clearly designed to bankrupt me, to force me into financial ruin even if she couldn't win in court. Because even if I eventually won the case, the legal fees alone would destroy me. It was economic warfare, pure and simple. I called Margaret first, then our lawyer, then sat at my kitchen table reading the lawsuit over and over until the words blurred together. "She can't be serious," I said to Margaret when she came over that evening. "Oh, she's serious," Margaret replied. "This is what people like her do when they can't get their way through manipulation. They try to destroy you financially." Our lawyer was more blunt. She's hoping you'll settle out of court just to avoid the legal fees. Even if she knows she can't win, she can make the process so expensive that you'll pay her to go away. How much are we talking about in legal fees? I asked. The lawyer's estimate made me sick. Even if we won quickly, I was looking at legal bills that would drain my retirement savings and probably force me to sell my house. If the case dragged on, if appeals were filed, if complications arose, I could lose everything I'd worked for my entire life. That night, I called my son. I hadn't spoken to him since our argument about fighting back, but this was bigger than our disagreement. This was about survival. She's suing me, I told him when he answered. Silence. Then, for what? I read him the lawsuit, every ridiculous accusation and inflated damage claim. I listened to him get angrier with each paragraph, heard him cursing and slamming things in the background. This is insane, he said when I finished. She can't do this to you. She can, and she is. What do you need? He asked. And I heard something in his voice I hadn't heard in months. The protective anger of a son who finally understood that his mother was under attack. I need you to testify, I said. I need you to tell the truth about what she did to you, what she was planning to do. I need you to stop hiding and help me fight this. Whatever you need, he said without hesitation. I'm done being ashamed of what happened. I'm done letting her control the narrative. It was the first time since this whole mess began that I felt like I had my son back. Not just his support, but his partnership, his willingness to stand up and be counted. But even with his help, we were facing an uphill battle. The bride had family money behind her now. Her parents had hired an expensive law firm from the state capital, lawyers who specialized in exactly this kind of litigation warfare. They filed motion after motion, demanding discovery documents, depositions, expert testimony about emotional trauma. They were trying to turn a simple defamation case into a years-long legal nightmare that would cost more to fight than to settle. Margaret and I spent weeks gathering evidence, documenting every lie in the lawsuit, building our defense. But I could see the worry in our lawyer's eyes. This wasn't just about winning or losing anymore. This was about surviving the process. 3 months into the lawsuit, I got an offer to settle. The bride would drop all claims against me in exchange for $75,000 and a written apology that would be posted on social media. $75,000. More money than I had in savings. More than my car was worth. Almost a third of what my house was worth. And a public apology that would essentially admit I was guilty of everything she had accused me of. It's extortion, Margaret said bluntly. She knows she can't win in court, so she's trying to extort money from you. But if I don't settle, the legal fees could be even more than that, I pointed out. Maybe. Or maybe something else will happen. Margaret had that look in her eyes again, the one she got when she was planning something. The look that meant she was about to turn the tables on someone who thought they were smarter than they actually were. What are you thinking? I asked. I'm thinking it's time to stop playing defense, she said. It's time to go on offense. She was right. For months, I had been reacting to their attacks, defending myself against their lies, trying to prove my innocence in a game where they kept changing the rules. But I had forgotten something important. I wasn't just a victim in this story. I was a woman who had spent 32 years fighting for her son, who had built a life through determination and hard work, who had survived abandonment and single parenthood and every challenge that had been thrown at her. I was a woman who knew how to fight, and it was time to remind everyone, including myself, exactly what that meant. Going on offense meant doing something I had avoided throughout this entire ordeal, telling my story publicly, completely, and without apology. Margaret had a friend who worked for the regional newspaper, a journalist who specialized in human interest stories with social justice angles. She had been following our case since the restraining order hearing, intrigued by the legal maneuvering and the obvious discrepancies in the bride's claims. "I've seen cases like this before," the journalist told me when we met at a coffee shop in the next town over. Women being legally bullied by people with more money and fewer scruples. The story needs to be told. So I told it, all of it. I told her about raising my son alone, about the sacrifices and struggles and triumphs that had shaped our relationship. I told her about meeting the bride, about the gradual erosion of my place in my son's life, about the whispered threat at the rehearsal dinner. I told her about the wedding that never happened, about the discovery of the cheating and the financial schemes, about the social media campaigns and legal threats that had followed. Most importantly, I told her about the lesson I had learned, that sometimes protecting the people you love means accepting that they might not thank you for it, at least not right away. The article was published on a Sunday morning with the headline, "The Mother Who Saved Her Son by Missing His Wedding." It was accompanied by photos of me and my son from his childhood, pictures that showed the bond that had been threatened by his ex-fiancee's manipulation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The newspaper's website crashed from the traffic. The article was shared thousands of times on social media, generating comments from people all over the country who had experienced similar situations with manipulative family members, predatory partners, and legal bullying. But more importantly, other people started coming forward with their own experiences involving the bride and her family. A former employer called the newspaper to report that the bride had been fired for stealing from the cash register and then had tried to sue for wrongful termination. A college roommate reached out to share stories about the bride's pattern of manipulation and financial exploitation of romantic partners. Most damaging of all, the man she had been cheating with contacted the journalist directly. He provided evidence that the affair had been going on for over a year and that the bride had told him the marriage was just a business arrangement to solve her family's money problems. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had made a career out of using and discarding people, who saw relationships as transactions and emotions as tools to be manipulated. The bride's lawsuit against me became a public relations nightmare for her. How do you claim emotional trauma when evidence shows you were planning to defraud your husband? How do you seek damages for defamation when multiple witnesses are coming forward to confirm the accusations? Her lawyers tried to suppress the article, claiming it violated their client's privacy and prejudiced potential jurors. But the damage was done. The truth was out, and it was spreading faster than they could contain it. 2 weeks after the article was published, I got a call from the bride's lawyer. Not a threatening letter this time. An actual phone call from a man who sounded tired and frustrated. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, "my client is prepared to dismiss the lawsuit against you." "In exchange for what?" I asked. "Nothing. She just wants this to end." I should have felt victorious. I should have been relieved that the financial threat was over, that I could keep my house and my savings and my peace of mind. Instead, I felt angry. "That's not good enough," I said. "Excuse me? Your client has put me through hell for the past year. She's damaged my reputation, threatened my financial security, and tried to destroy my relationship with my son. Dropping the lawsuit isn't enough." "What do you want?" he asked carefully. "I want a public apology, a real one, not some lawyer-written statement that admits no wrongdoing. I want her to publicly acknowledge what she did and take responsibility for the harm she caused. My client isn't going to agree to that. Then we'll see each other in court. I hung up feeling something I hadn't experienced in months: power. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I was the one making demands. I was the one with leverage. I was the one who got to decide what was acceptable and what wasn't. The bride and her lawyers hadn't expected this. They had assumed that once the lawsuit was dropped, I would gratefully slink away and let them control the narrative one more time. They had forgotten that I wasn't the same woman who had quietly walked away from the rehearsal dinner a year earlier. That woman had been broken by their cruelty, diminished by their manipulation, silenced by their threats. This woman had been forged in the fire of their attacks. This woman had learned to fight back. This woman was not going to disappear quietly just because they were tired of dealing with the consequences of their actions. 3 days later, I got another call, this time from a different lawyer, one who represented the bride's parents. Their financial crimes had caught the attention of federal investigators. The insurance fraud, the false loan applications, the attempts to manipulate estate planning documents, all of it was being reviewed by authorities who specialized in financial crimes. The bride's family was facing potential criminal charges that would make their lawsuit against me look like a minor inconvenience. Mrs. Johnson, the new lawyer said, my clients would like to discuss a resolution to all of these matters. I'm listening, I said. The resolution they proposed was comprehensive. The lawsuit against me would be dismissed with prejudice, meaning it could never be refiled. The bride would issue a public apology acknowledging her role in the wedding cancellation and taking responsibility for the subsequent harassment campaign against me. Most importantly, the bride and her family would agree to have no further contact with me or my son and would remove all social media posts related to our family. In exchange, I would agree not to pursue civil claims against them for harassment and defamation. It wasn't perfect justice. There were no financial consequences for the damage they had done to my reputation and peace of mind. But it was vindication, acknowledgement, and closure. Most importantly, it was over. I accepted their offer with one addition. Any future violations of the no contact agreement would result in immediate legal action and the release of all evidence regarding their financial crimes to law enforcement. They agreed immediately. The public apology was posted on the same social media platforms where the lies about me had been spread. It was brief but clear. I want to publicly apologize to Mrs. Ken White Johnson for my role in the events surrounding my canceled wedding. I take full responsibility for excluding her from the ceremony and for the subsequent harassment she experienced. Mrs. Johnson is a devoted mother who raised a wonderful son, and she deserved to be treated with respect and kindness. I deeply regret my actions and the harm they caused to her and her family. It wasn't a perfect apology. It was clearly written by lawyers and carefully worded to minimize legal liability. But it was a public acknowledgement of the truth, posted where everyone who had seen the original lies could see it. The response was overwhelmingly supportive. Hundreds of comments from people who had read the newspaper article, who had followed the story, who wanted to express their support for a mother who had stood up for herself and her family. But the most important response came from my son. He called me the day the apology was posted, and for the first time in over a year, his voice sounded like the boy I had raised. I'm proud of you, Mom, he said. I'm proud of how you fought back. I'm proud of how you stood up for yourself, even when I was too weak to stand up for you. You weren't weak, I told him. You were hurt and confused and manipulated. That's not the same thing as weak. I should have seen it sooner, he said. I should have protected you. You did protect me. Maybe not at first, but you did. When it mattered most, you chose to stand with me instead of against me. We talked for 2 hours that day. about the wedding that never happened, about the year of legal battles that followed, about the lessons we had both learned about trust and manipulation and the importance of family. But mostly we talked about the future, about rebuilding our relationship, about the traditions we wanted to restore, about the Sunday dinners we had missed. 3 months later, he started dating someone new, a teacher from the next town over, a woman who had read about our story in the newspaper and had reached out to tell him she admired his courage in standing up for his mother. When he brought her to meet me, she came bearing a homemade apple pie and a genuine smile. She asked to see his baby pictures. She wanted to hear stories about his childhood. She laughed at my jokes and complimented my cooking. Most importantly, she treated me like what I was, the most important woman in his life before she came along, and someone who would remain important long after. "I hope we can be friends," she told me as they were leaving. "I know how much you mean to him, and I want you to know that I would never try to change that." I hugged her then, this woman who understood that loving my son meant embracing his history, not erasing it. "We're going to be just fine," I told her. And we were. A year later, I was invited to their wedding, not as an afterthought or an obligation, but as an honored guest whose presence was genuinely wanted and valued. I wore the blue dress I had never worn to the first wedding, the one that had hung untouched in my closet while my son's world fell apart and rebuilt itself. I sat in the front row where mothers of the groom belong, holding the small gift I had brought, a photo album filled with pictures of my son's life, the same album I had tried to give to his first fiancée. But this time, when I handed it to the bride during the reception, she opened it immediately and spent 20 minutes looking at every picture, asking questions about each one, exclaiming over his chubby toddler cheeks and gap-toothed grins. "He looks just like you," she said, pointing to a picture of him at age 5, missing his 2 front teeth and grinning at the camera. "He's always been my sunshine," I told her. "I can see why," she said, "and I want you to know, you did an amazing job raising him. He's the kindest, most thoughtful man I've ever met." That's when I knew she was the right one. Not because she was perfect, not because she said all the right things, but because she saw my son the way I did, as someone worth loving completely, history and all. During the reception, my son pulled me aside for a mother-son dance. As we swayed to the music, he whispered in my ear, "Thank you for saving me, Mom, even when I didn't want to be saved." "You would have figured it out eventually," I told him. "Maybe, but I might have lost you in the process. And that would have been the real tragedy." I thought about that night, about how far we had come from that whispered threat at a rehearsal dinner, about the year of pain and fighting and growth that had led us to this moment. The woman who had tried to erase me from my son's life was long gone, reduced to a cautionary tale about the consequences of manipulation and greed. The legal battles were over, the debts settled, the truth finally told. But more than that, I had found something I didn't know I had lost: my voice. For too many years, I had been the quiet one, the accommodating one, the woman who absorbed other people's cruelty and kept the peace at any cost. I had let myself be diminished, marginalized, pushed aside whenever my presence became inconvenient. The bride had tried to make me disappear completely, but in fighting back, I had discovered that I was much stronger than I had ever believed. I was a woman who had raised a son alone and done it well. I was a woman who could spot manipulation and call it out. I was a woman who could fight legal battles and win. I was a woman whose story mattered, whose voice deserved to be heard. I was a woman who had written herself back into her own story when someone tried to brush her out. And that knowledge, that I could stand up for myself, that I could fight back, that I could win, that changed everything. These days, I volunteer at the women's shelter downtown, helping other women who are dealing with manipulation and abuse and legal harassment. I share my story when it's helpful, offer practical advice about documentation and evidence, and finding good lawyers. But mostly, I listen. I listen to women who have been told they're crazy, who have been gaslit and threatened and isolated. I listen to mothers who have been pushed out of their children's lives by manipulative partners. I listen to women who have forgotten their own strength. And I tell them what I learned, that sometimes the people who try to erase you from your own story are doing you a favor. They're showing you exactly who they are and what they're capable of. They're giving you the information you need to protect yourself and the people you love. They're also underestimating you because women like us, women who have survived and thrived and fought for our families, we're not as easy to erase as people think. We're not as powerless as we appear. We're not as quiet as we've been trained to be. When someone tries to push us out, we have choices. We can disappear quietly, accept our diminished role, let other people control our narratives, or we can fight back. We can tell our truth. We can stand our ground. We can remind everyone, including ourselves, that our stories matter. Our voices deserve to be heard. Our presence is not negotiable. We can write ourselves back into our own lives. The night my son got married, his real wedding to the woman who deserved him, I went home to my little house and sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a journal I had started keeping during the legal battles. I opened to the first page and read the title I had written there a year earlier, The Day They Tried to Brush Me Out. Then I turned to a blank page and wrote, The Day I Wrote Myself Back In. Because that's what this whole story was really about. Not the wedding that didn't happen, not the legal battles that followed, not even the vindication that eventually came. It was about a woman who forgot her own power and then remembered it. A woman who let herself be silenced and then found her voice. A woman who was nearly erased from her own story and then picked up the pen and kept writing. It was about learning that sometimes the most important fight is the one for your right to exist in your own life. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to fight that fight, you don't just save yourself, you save everyone who loves you too. This story is dedicated to every mother who has ever been told she doesn't fit someone else's picture. Every woman who has been pushed aside for someone else's convenience, and every person who has had to fight for their right to remain in their own story. Your voice matters. Your presence is not negotiable, and you are stronger than anyone who tries to diminish you will ever understand. When someone tries to brush you out, write yourself back in. The pen is in your hand, and the story is yours to tell.